has been such an insightful day for all of us so far, and I hope that you have all enjoyed it too. And for everyone joining us remotely, welcome back to you also. Hope that you took some time to just have a little bit of a break, because we are now going to be looking at housing as an essential lever for economic prosperity across Scotland. Our next panel will review the need for homes for workers and the commercial opportunities. Now, taking us through this session, I'd like to welcome to the stage the chair of the panel, Chief Executive at Prosper, Sarah Chame.
Thank you so much for having me along. Great to be here. What a fantastic event. Casey on the last panel talked about the world not being in a great shape. And the origins of my organisation is when Scotland wasn't in a good shape in the 1930s after the stock market crash. And what happened then was that the industrialists got together with government, with wider society, with the trade unions, with the universities, and set up Scottish Development Council, which then morphed into the Scottish Council for Development and Industry, and today we are Prosper. Prosper brings together governments, business, colleges, universities, and communities to overcome the barriers and seize the opportunities to economic growth. Scotland's World Economic Forum, if you wish. We've heard about the hugely exciting opportunities in energy transition, climate tech, life science, and there are plenty of others, including space, that Myrtle set out for us this morning. The energy transition in particular is really Scotland's to lose, but there's a lot that we need to do. And one of the key dependencies there is housing. So that's why this panel is so important. There's a really strong correlation between housing supply and economic performance. And housing is, of course, as Zara said, a critical economic enabler. Being able to afford a home, whether rented or bought, is linked to so many aspects of well-being and the quality of our lives and our life chances. It literally, so much hangs on it. And Scotland has a housing shortage, and it's becoming more and more of an issue for employers right across Scotland. It's not new. Prosper identified that a new housing supply as a priority back in our economic blueprint in 2021. And that undersupply relative to demand has been there really since the financial crash happened, and the completion rates have not recovered. Scotland has lots of diverse communities, so the nature of challenge varies enormously depending on which part of Scotland that you're in, and it's partly why this is such a challenging issue for us right now. So we have rural undersupply in rural areas with shortages of contractors, massive demand in growing cities like Edinburgh and indeed in Glasgow, and then future demand in growth industries, so very exciting things going on around the green free ports, particularly around Rosscromarty and Inverness. Really very exciting industrial opportunity there. But houses are critical to unlocking all of it. So there's lots of great innovation going on. One of the things that's very exciting right now is the timber manufacturing, existing timber manufacturing, the kind of innovation that's going on there. But again, it needs scale if it's going to succeed. So why has it happened? Why have we got this housing challenge? Well, we've really focused on affordable supply, rather than that sort of wider 10 years, and we'll come in and talk about that in more detail. And those rent controls that we've had in recent years have really halted the expansion of the private rented sector. We've got lots and lots of different legislation, including a housing bill, which is added to the cost per unit. And the build-to-rent sector is going to be ready to unlock, really, when that housing bill is amended. So lots of opportunities for an incoming government to fix some of these issues and some of the things that need to happen. So we're going to explore that in a bit more depth with our panel this afternoon. But first of all, I just wanted to flag up some emerging findings. We've been doing some really interesting work with the Built Environment Smarter Transformation Innovation Centre, with Brodie's LLP, Homes for Scotland, Scottish National Investment Bank, and Wheatley Group. And some of the emerging findings coming out of that work is about asks around rural growth and having that sort of flexibility that recognises the different communities in Scotland, and that innovation and delivery. Myrtle talked a lot about innovation, and it's just as critical around housing. In terms of our cities and that sort of urban growth, a sort of long-term target of housing of all types, including emerging segments, is going to be really critical to all of that, as well as rebuilding investor confidence. Great leadership in innovation is another area where a lot needs to happen. So we're really thinking about modern homes and new types of housing. And Homes England's beginning to do some really interesting things around incentivising innovation. So ensuring that we're on a level playing field in terms of investment and attracting that investment and retaining it to Scotland is going to be really, really critical. And data-driven design. We need some really good evidence base and understanding of how our homes are working, and massively exciting opportunities there. And then skills and supply chain is the last piece of the jigsaw here. But I think we'll unpack these in more detail with the real experts. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our panel this afternoon. So we have James Blakey, who's the Planning Director with Moda Group, if you'd like to come up and join me. William Kyle, Fund Director from Thriving Investments. And Jane Wood, who's the Chief Executive of Homes for Scotland. Thank you all. So James, if I could come to you first of all, say a few words of introduction. Tell us all about yourself.
Well, I'm not sure.
And what you're bringing to the party today.
Well, delighted to be here. I'm fortunate enough to be the Planning Director at Moda Living. My name is James Blakey. So we are a residential investor operator. So we invest in residential neighbourhoods, so new homes, both here in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. And we've invested around about 450 million so far in Scotland. And we're poised with our pens ready for about another 500 million. And we provide rental properties. So we are a large institutional landlord. So not far from here, about 5-minute walk, we have Holland Park, which is 433 apartments, awash with amenity, and with a very diverse community there, ranging from people who are 6 or 7 months old all the way through to people who are in their 70s. In addition, here in Glasgow, we have something called Vista Park, which is 156 predominantly houses, which again is a rental model. So we're keen to invest in Scotland, and I guess also I should mention that we have also the benefit of sitting on the Scottish Government's Housing Investment Task Force as well.
Jane.
Thank you. I'm Jane Wood, and I'm Chief Executive for Homes for Scotland. And Homes for Scotland represents about 90% of all 10-year home builders in Scotland, including additionally their supply chain as well, so architects, lawyers, banks and others and planners. I also sit on the Housing 2040 board at the Scottish Government, and most recently been appointed onto the NSET, which is, I'm not going to use acronyms today, the National Strategy for Economic Transformation Scottish Government board as well, and on the CBI Council as well.
And William?
Yeah, William Kyle. I am Fund Director for Thriving Investments, who are a FCA-regulated fund manager. We're part of Places for People Group, and we're sort of unique in that aspect. We're the only regulated fund manager that's owned by a housing association. We were set up in 2017 to carry on the aims of the group, delivering affordable housing but using third-party capital. And we've progressed that in Scotland. We have our mid-market rent fund, which invests broadly between Edinburgh and Glasgow. We're lucky enough to have that partly funded by Scottish Government and to have Scottish National Investment Bank as an investee in that. And the aim of that was originally to build 1,000 affordable homes within easy commuting distance of Edinburgh and Glasgow. We're currently at around about 1,200 new homes and a fund of about 200 million, which we're hoping to grow further.
So James and William, what sectors of the market are you focused on, and where do you see the barriers and opportunities?
Shall I go first?
Please
So
do.
we're very much focused at the moment on three things really. So we've got the build to rent sector, which is huge and could be even greater in Scotland. I'll come back to that in a second. We've got the student accommodation, purpose built, and we also have single family housing, so that is housing. So in terms of sort of build to rent, the key barrier at the moment is rent control. So rent control came in September 2022, and that's devastated, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks. So from a long-term investor's perspective, the housing bill had a series of unintended consequences which drove all the investors away from Scotland. Now, Moda, we were heavily invested in Scotland. We can see the potential here in Scotland, so we decided to stay. And from a ministerial point of view, we were delighted to be invited onto the Housing Investment Task Force to try and change that policy framework to a point where investors would come back into the market. And through that work, I'm delighted to say that actually there's still a little bit of that journey to go, but we're on a trajectory of positive change that hopefully will resonate towards the end of the year, where investors will start to return to the market. From a student accommodation point of view, there's a huge demand here in both Glasgow and Edinburgh and elsewhere. So if you look at what we do, it's very much mixed tenure. So that might be built to rent and student with maybe some co-living as well as some of the single family housing. So that is to provide neighbourhoods, and we manage those long term. So we are a long-term steward. We provide all the amenity and we provide on-site teams, so 24/7. So you get a very personalised service, irrespective of which tenure you sit in. So the current barrier for us is really the housing bill itself. It's not investor sentiment, because people do want to be here.
And we're beginning to see some really exciting innovation in terms of that mixed living. So I'm sort of thinking about Social Hub in Glasgow, where they're sort of thinking about multiple use. You've got student accommodation, but then hotel, leisure, community involvement.
It's a very clever planning permission. I'm the planning director, so I've kind of got a bit of a nerdy interest in that. So it's a hotel permission which they've manipulated into a very clever concept and an award-winning. And an award-winning one, actually. So we were at the Scottish Property Awards the week before last together, and we won an award, they won an award. But again, it shows that sort of creativity, but the demand and the need for more residential accommodation and the need for homes, which are purpose-built and highly managed, highly amenitized. Scotland has got all the key ingredients for it in terms of great graduate retention, great corporates, fantastic universities, accessibility. So investors do want to come here, and we want to be here and manage here.
William, how about yourself? What's the kind of sectors that you're focused on?
Well, we're a slightly different sector in that we're focused very much on affordable housing, and what we do is provide additional affordable housing. So the traditional route to deliver social housing would be through Section 75 planning agreements that come with mainstream housing planning consents. Our aim was to do something slightly different, which would bring additional affordable housing forward. And we've used a tenure which is mid-market rent, which is sort of unique to Scotland, but could equally be intermediate rent or key worker rent in other places. The funding that the Scottish Government brought forward in 2017 set up sort of 3 different ways of doing that. We were one of the recipients of funding at that stage, and we're the only one who's gone down the sort of FCA regulated manager route. And that has allowed us to crowd in investment from, one of the speakers alluded to earlier, where does the capital come from? We've got 3 of the biggest pension funds in the UK who are our investors. We're delighted to have them on board. We benefit from their sort of social impact pot, which gears their funding towards us. Everything we do in affordable housing is additional, and we're very much targeting I suppose key worker puts people into too small a category. It's more like essential worker. It's anyone whose job involves them having to be in the city centre. So can't just pop open a laptop and dial into a call. They've got to be present. They've got to be on site. And what we found was people were being forced out to either a long commute or poor quality, unaffordable accommodation. So what we're trying to do is to deliver that high quality, mainly low-rise apartments, but within 15, 20 minutes commute of a city centre on public transport. We're targeting urban brownfield sites, so there's a regeneration element to that as well. It doesn't have the amenity of Moda at all. We've deliberately not gone for that because we've got to keep costs very well controlled within that. But what we find is that by providing that accommodation, it's allowing quite a number of our tenants to have that social mobility that will then allow them to move by, renting with us for 2 years. They can save enough for a deposit on a house and buy it and move on. And that's the sort of cycle we want to promote.
And of course, we need more housing of all tenures. So whilst there
Absolutely.
has been quite a strong focus on affordable, it's still incredibly important. It's not either or, it's and, isn't it, in terms of tenures?
Absolutely that. It's and. We need across all the different sectors of the market. And one of the things James alluded to with the rent bill doesn't directly impact us, but what it does do is it's diminished the construction sector in Scotland quite severely. We've seen people pulling out of developing in Scotland. We've seen the number of major contractors who can tender for a job fall away, and that just takes the competitiveness out of the market and just means it's a real struggle. And it's equally difficult for the people that are left to do it, to make things work.
Jane, I think your membership of the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, this advisory group, I think sends a really strong message about the criticality of housing to unleashing growth. In terms of those emerging findings around, rural growth, urban growth, modern homes and innovation, and the skills and supply chain, do you recognise that? Is that what? Have we got those right, or what more would you like to add around those?
Yeah, I mean, I recognise it, but I think if you want to stand back and look at all tenure housing, it is such a complex model.
Yeah.
To go from the point of no land, no house, to the point where you have a house. It is so complex, and I think the challenges around house building are all of those different rabbit holes that impact the ability to build a house. And I think for me, if I was here, and I do represent our membership of house builders, and there was a list of things that were, and we do actually have, sitting in government at the moment, a list of the top 50 barriers to house building, which we're working through with them, solutions. The planning performance will be the top issue, okay? And you know that, and maybe talk about barriers more. But that is not, therefore, again, helped by what's happening down in south of the border. So we're hearing from a lot of the PLCs that it's easier to do business. So that worries me about, getting that investment in. Access to finance is a big problem. And when we look at our sector, we have to be very careful that we're protecting the SME element of our sector. And just to give you a very scary statistic, we've recently done some research on this. We kind of knew the answers. As like all good research, you should know the answers before you do it. But in 2017, 40% of houses were built by SMEs. It's gone down to 20%. And that's really concerning. And the key element of that is access to finance. So we need some of that innovative finance. I think the state of the whole housing supply in Scotland worries me, because yes, you talk about labour, yes, all of these things, but ultimately, housing completions and starts are falling year on year. I mean, they're down 17 and 12% respectively this year, and they're not going back up. We've got this horrible badge in Scotland that we're in a national housing emergency. That's not good for the country or investors. And we've got 28% of the households in Scotland are living with some form of housing need. And that's before we start on homelessness. So the overall picture is a really challenging one. There are signs of some good things. The inflation rates are obviously impacting. Mortgages are just teetering down a little bit. You've got between 0.4 and 0.6% on some of the fixed rates. But housing supply is a problem. We're not building the houses, so the cost of houses, the average cost of a new home is 300,000. So, there's an awful lot of things in there that need fixing, and a lot of that has been decades in the making, these problems in this market in Scotland, in the sector. I don't think I answered one of your questions there. Sorry about that.
Good. No, you absolutely, you helped us understand the real barriers that we need to overcome. So I think we've got a great question on Slido that I think brings us to the, okay, what are we going to do about it? You mentioned the failings of the housing bill, including unintended consequences. How do we fix Scotland's housing problem? Do you want to go first, Jane,
just
on
because
this
it's
one?
also one of the plethora of points I didn't manage to squeeze into the first answer.
There's a lot to fix.
How we fix it, and it's to your point, we need to understand the regulatory burden. We've got a very difficult political climate in Scotland. We've got minority government. We're going to have a minority government, whatever happens next. That makes politics quite difficult. We can't do the mission-led stuff that Labour are doing down south, and this isn't about party politics. This is about how we fix our economic and social discuss. Okay, we'll do that offline. But the regulatory burden, I mean, we've worked out the regulations that impact house building at the moment, they cost on average 34,000 a house. So that's around building standards, transition to net zero. We've got the new building levy coming in. And there is some really interesting work, and you've been involved in it as well, Sarah, around the New Deal for business, the business regulatory environment, what is the impact of regulation? What are the unintended consequences? We need to understand it in house building. We need to listen to the Competition Markets Authority recommendations to say, SMEs cannot carry all of these costs. It's not sustainable. So I think what we do is we look at the regulation pretty quickly, and we look at that systemically in relation to planning as well, and land supply and all of those issues. I think if we do that all together, I think that's what we're trying to do on behalf of the sector at the moment.
Other perspectives? Who would like to come in first?
I think one of the things is obviously we've touched on this is the problems in the planning system. We do seem to have some real issues there. I think post-COVID, the planning system has not really been functioning as it should. We hear of, and it's a very oversimplified argument. Every time somebody says it takes 2 years to get a planning consent, somebody says, but there's lots of consented sites that are sitting there unbuilt. Beneath all of those things, there are a whole load of complexities. You've got to ask, if there's a site that's consented and it's not being built, why is that? Is it something in the planning consent that's made it unviable? Has there been, some of these requirements that Jane talked about that have come in since the planning process started that make a once viable scheme unviable? Is it just the funding piece, which again, the cost of that has increased? So there's a lot we need to do, but we need to get that planning system working such that viable sites and sites that are broadly acceptable in terms of residential development are fast-tracked through that system. There's a requirement now for us all to do pre-application consultations. I don't know a developer who doesn't take that very seriously and do a really good job of that. And so it should be the case that when a consent goes in, most of the issues have been dealt with at pre-app stage, and that should just be getting the sort of, not quite the rubber stamp, but a run-through planning that's relatively smooth. And I think that's really important. And that would see schemes that are viable now being consented and developed out. And that's a start. It's not the whole process, but it's a start to the process.
I mean, we talk about it at ministerial level as part of the task force. So it's about resourcing, it's about skill sets, it's about a change of culture, it's about changing what planning looks like in terms of the brand. Planning needs to be rebranded in the sense it needs to be a facilitator of development. I don't come across local authority officers that don't want to do a good job, and they don't want to provide you with consents. But it's incumbent on us as applicants to bring forward quality planning applications as well. I mean, Holland Park here was determined, and it's a city block up to 22 stories. That was determined in 8 weeks because we worked in partnership with Glasgow City Council. They put a major projects team on it, and we were lucky, and they went through it and they resourced it properly. They can't do that on everything. So resourcing, and let's be honest, money is going into those departments with the right officers and skill sets is absolutely key. But that cultural change of attitude must be, and the title here is Housing and Economic Impact, is that housing is a key driver. It's a key driver of spend and regeneration. It will support city centre living and also rural living. So enlightened authorities, and we do a lot of work down south as well, get that, and they invest very heavily in their planning and regeneration and economic teams, and that's absolutely critical. and you can work it, but it is a partnership. We at Holland Park here won the BTR Development of the Year the week before last for Scotland as a whole. I emailed all of the Scottish officers that worked on that because it was a partnership. It wasn't just an award for Moda, it was an award for Glasgow City Council, because the quality of that was as much down to them as it was to us. And that has to be the right way to do it, that collaborative approach.
I'm really thoughtful about our last session. I mean, Jane, you made a comment about, we can't do that mission-led stuff in Scotland. Now, I get your point about our economy in Scotland is dominated by SMEs, and the regulatory burden on SMEs is particularly keenly felt. But I suppose the conversation in our last panel was about businesses being purposeful, about actually reaping rewards from getting out ahead of regulation. Actually, if they are having a positive impact on the communities in which they operate, the jurisdictions in which they operate, and on the environment, they are reaping rewards from that in terms of growth as businesses. So I'm just thoughtful about what does good look like if those businesses who are actually purposeful or solving the problems of people and planet profitably, they're the ones who are experiencing growth. Is that just easier for larger corporations to do? Is that just harder for smaller businesses? And I'm not sure that's right, but really keen to kind of get to your first perspective.
Point, I shouldn't have used the can't word. We shouldn't have used the can't word. We could be mission-led in Scotland. Yeah. Mission-led, so if I was say, what would that look like in Scotland? For me, I would ask the Scottish Government to set an all-tenure target.
Yeah.
Targets create focus. They show an ambition. And but everybody in business knows as soon as you set a target, you risk assess it, you plan it, you resource it. So it all falls underneath. And I think we've got a plethora of targets in Scotland, of course we have. But that high level all tenure target, I think, is really important. And we don't have that. So I think the mission-led, it's more difficult to get the big decisions, the big changes through, a parliament that we've got is what I meant. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of what frustrates me is we know the social and economic impact of housing. There are people here who are in social housing. If we don't have the right housing for Scotland's population in an inclusive way, that impacts not just those at the end who are in the social affordable end, but also those who want to build businesses here and professionals, as we've already referred to. So we need, and I think what people don't understand is that codependency. We need to build all tenure houses. We need to, you talked a little bit about too much investment in social. We need to get that right, because that makes the market economy work properly. And I think one of the big problems is that there is a lack of understanding of the social impact of housing by civic society and by some of those opinion formers and policymakers. I think sometimes we forget the opportunity win that we have there. But I think to your question, I spent 10 years in sustainable, as you know, before business in the community. And I think that the level of sophistication between the big PLCs who have to report back on their ESG and their sustainable development goals, and then the SME, there's a big bank of clear blue water there. But I think that there is a want to do it. And obviously because it's a very heavily regulated industry sector, they have to do a lot of that on the technical front. But I think there's a lot more they can do on that legacy piece, the community legacy piece, which they'll do through the planning. But I think there's a lot of exciting things being done by private and public house builders at the moment. But more could be done, definitely, on measurement, definitely.
James or William, do you want to come in at all on that? What's your take on it?
I think that in terms of, from a build-to-rent perspective, we can deliver at scale and at pace and at quality very quickly, because we can bring 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 dwellings and homes together at any one time. Our funding is both from MODA, but also from a series of different funders, which are looking at those mission statements and those targets from an ESG point of view. So we have a very strong ESG strategy. We're heavily accredited through something called Fitwell. If people know that, certainly encourage you to look it up, and Gresby. So our funders are looking for those. So those mission statements are clear. We can deliver from a build-to-rent point of view very quickly, and the demand and the need is extreme, as Jane has said. I mean, the PRS market has fallen off a cliff since September 2022, so the demand is there. One of the key sort of challenges that we have to that mission isn't land, because there's plenty of land in Scotland. It's currently construction cost. So build cost here in Scotland, because of that, is now as expensive here. If you're looking at the city centre type site, you're looking at London prices to build, but you don't have the comparable rents to offset that cost. That is a huge challenge. And as Will mentioned before, we need those contractors to come back. That's a consequence of the housing bill, unfortunately. That was one of those unintended consequences. From a Moda point of view, going back to mission, in Birmingham, we have 2 skills academies where we work with the mayor and Birmingham City Council. We've done some great work with Edinburgh City Council in terms of skills and training, bringing on those apprenticeships, lots of educational hours, because we want people to buy into that rental model and that brand and that way of living. It's not for everybody, but it's about choice and flexibility. So from our point of view, as a long-term steward in our residential communities, it's something that we can take seriously and actually ride out some of those investment bumps, because it is like a 30-year plan. So for us, it's about getting those fundamentals right, and then you can invest really heavily and quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're something similar to that. If we look at the economic impact of house building, it's huge. We did a bit of a study quite recently. There were 3 companies who all benefited from the Scottish Government loan back in 2018. Between us, we've built 3,000 affordable homes. We've spent about 540 million in the construction sector. There's about nearly 3,000 net additional jobs being created through that process. And every year there's another nearly 80 million of funds going into the community from retail and leisure spend from these people. So the economic benefits are very much there. And the way we try to work is to work with the SME developers and try and take part of their larger schemes, forward fund it for them, so it makes them easier to go back to their funders, having de-risked potentially half of a development site. And as James said, we can do things at pace, whereas you're not building to a sales program. We've got development in Glasgow just now, which we've not taken any handovers yet. It's 199 new homes, and we've got 600 people on the waiting list for that. So the demand is huge, and the prize is there if we can get that accelerated.
We have a great question here from Susan Campbell on Slido. Well, where are the most significant growth opportunities for housing in Scotland, and how can the public, private and third sectors work together to unlock this?
Do you want me to?
Particular geographies? Are
Do you
there
want me to start
places
with
that
that
you want to... I mean, I sort of flagged up, the size of the opportunity, for example, around the Gree Freeport in Cromarty.
I think those are absolutely opportunities there. And I hate the term low-hanging fruit, but Edinburgh and Glasgow are very much that. There's an identified demand, there's a huge population, there's an economic engine driving the need for the jobs that go with it. One of the big challenges is rural housing, to keep rural communities vibrant. And there's a lot of chat I've had today with various people around, high-speed broadband and all the other innovative things that can happen in rural communities that might be able to help that. So I think there's a future for that. We're going to unlock some real innovative solutions around affordable housing and regenerating some of our communities. The challenge we have there is that, but by geography, it's generally much more expensive to build, and there's a narrower range of people who will be attracted to doing that. So that's a challenge we need to pick up, and that might be moving more towards off-site manufacture, more sort of panelised construction, which we've seen some great innovation in Scotland around that. We've got some brilliant people doing that, and I think that will help. But also, if they can do that and then bring in local finishing trades to boost the local economy, we might just get that right.
I think it's a great question, and I think I know where it's come from. So from a housing task force point of view, because the housing task force is split up into 7 work streams, and work stream 1 is about rent control. So when we were seeking to define what that rental product was, you had to try and get to a point where you'd got urban and rural housing, and Will's absolutely right. Urban will, in a sense, take care of itself once we get the housing bill sorted out. But the rural element also needed to be promoted, and it's more to do with management rather than kind of the physical build, in the sense of that institutional grade management and the way that it's operated from a rental perspective. So you are getting all of those benefits and that amenity level and that sort of 24/7 care. You're cocooned within that rental model from a build to rent perspective. And that definition was something that we spent a long time making sure we got right. And hopefully you will see that as the Housing Minister then publishes the report, which will come out through the Housing Task Force. But also there is a move now to seek to exempt build-to-rent and MMR from that rent control process. And even though that's coming to an end at the end of March, or the end of this month now, it still figures within the housing bill, which the Housing Minister is determined to try and get through stage 3 and enacted before the recess, which is June this year. So I think that will be really interesting, but the rural growth is something from a single family housing point of view where there's huge potential.
I've got another great question. I don't know if there's anything you want to come in on briefly, Jane, before I move on to the next question.
I would just say, in answering that question, I think the risk of economic and social risk of undersupply is being felt by so many industries now across rural and urban. So I think we've got to look at tourism, hospitality. We've got to listen to these voices. It's really critical.
That's certainly what we're hearing in terms of it being a massive barrier to growing their business, whether it's whiskey, salmon, food and drink, tourism, right across the piece. And I saw David in the room earlier. How are panelists planning for green heat delivery and development, heat pumps or heat networks? And there is a question in the room, so I'm conscious I'm not sure how green heat delivery in developments, heat pumps or heat networks?
Heat pumps, a lot of solar.
Yeah.
There's a great move towards solar. Again, if you look at Vista Park, they've got solar. The move there will be into batteries, into individual properties as well, in terms of off-grid. There's a huge amount, I think somebody mentioned it in one of the earlier panels, there's a huge amount of tech which is coming. We're very tech-enabled, so I think one of our partners, Utopia, is in the room. All of our units are censored, and it's not just about generating the electricity, but it's about reducing the demand for it and the use thereof. So in terms of insulation and the way that building control works as well.
It's data-driven design, which is another...
Absolutely huge.
Anything else? I know there is a question in the room from a gentleman in front
there. I think we benefit quite well from Scottish building regs at the moment. The Fabric First approach provides really very efficient homes before you even switch the heating on, and we're delighted that we've seen that with all the ones that we've built recently. We're using solar as much as we can. We shift all our common areas to green tariffs, which is just a sort of an easy win. As soon as a property becomes vacant, that goes onto a green tariff. We hope that the incoming tenant will keep it on that. They don't have to, obviously, but we're moving towards that. I think in the longer term, we will move towards heat pumps, and we are looking at one development just now which has an energy network. So we're looking at all of these options.
Great. There is a question here. I don't know if there's a mic.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Garrow. I do business and product development. And 15 years ago, I became aware of the shortage of housing in the Highlands and wondered how do we do that, all that geography. I went and found technology, and for when people were asking me, I would said, water cleaned for you and after you, 7 words. I had found technology to clean drinking water. I had found technology to process, different technology to process wastewater. Both technologies at the second mouse gets the cheese stayed. They were used in the UK and in the common market, and there is a European Court of Justice judgment that says if something is sold and used in one part of the market, it is inappropriate, it must not be obstructed by government or others.
So what's your question for the panel?
The question is, how do we change the regulations that if our wastewater still relate to the Roman technology, you have to get a soak-away survey. We don't need a soak-away survey. The wastewater.
Are you arguing that that Scotland doesn't have the right tools to do this? I mean, we've got an independent water regulator in Scotland, Wicks. I don't know if there's anything you want to see on water, wastewater. It sounds like a terrifically exciting innovation opportunity, but perhaps a regulatory barrier to it.
There are regulatory barriers.
And is that because we do not have the tools in Scotland?
We have a monopoly supplier who is not obliged to provide service.
Okay.
They show no interest in 1/40.
Okay, we're very, very tight for time, so I don't know if there's anything that the panel want to comment on, but I don't think we do have a monopoly supplier, in fact.
I think it's well raised. We know utilities can be a big blocker. I think that's far too technical for me to try and answer, because I would be making things up, so I'm going to not answer.
But one maybe to pick up later on over drinks.
But I think it's an important point.
I do think so that you make an interesting point about infrastructure generally, though, in the sense of investing in infrastructure. And I think that's absolutely critical, whether that's physical hard infrastructure and using tech in a very productive way, but also in social infrastructure as well. So we talk about housing a great deal, but we need to talk about schools and doctors and dentists and those sorts of things that actually support urban living, but also rural living. And those things go hand in glove. And I think the point you were trying to make there is you can't see one without the other. And that integrated nature of provision, whether it's through Section 75s, or whether it's a government appetite for risk and investment, I think it's absolutely key. And again, we've been debating that very, very hard with the ministerial team as part of the task force. They have not had an easy ride about that.
So lots of exciting opportunities there, I think, to do. And of course, again, it's very energy intensive, treating our drinking, everything that we use water-wise to drinking water quality is terribly wasteful of resource. But what a great discussion again. I'll never be invited to chair because I've run over, but one that could have gone on in much greater depth. But it's really encouraging to see the opportunities we have before us. Thank you to our panellists, James Blakey, William Kyle, and Jane Wood.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.